Well, hi! Welcome to another Prep Timber tutorial. In the last episode, we discussed finding repositories you're interested in and selecting projects to contribute to. This episode, we'll be walking you through your first PR. If you know how to do that, great. If not, this one's for you. So first things first, we need to talk about Git. So Git was created by Linus Torvalds, and if you're not familiar with that name, that's actually the person who created Linux, the operating system, as well. He was tired of the other ways of keeping track of changes and decided to create Git and to be super simple, in concept anyway, super simple program to keep track of changes. And fun fact, Torvalds called it Git because he considered it his stupid little content tracker. I'm left with the question, what is a Git? And how does one do a Git? What do you do with a Git? To put it in simple terms, Git saves changes to files to a history of other changes. So for example, let's step out of code for a second and think about real world, what would this look like? Imagine that if you had a log of every outfit you ever wore, ever. That is what Git does, but in changes for files. So Git makes that history reviewable. We can search through it. We can see who did what, when, and review any of the comments they made to kind of give us some insight into why they were making those changes. Not only does Git have the history, but it also gives us tools for copying the code and putting it somewhere else. Like say, from your local computer to GitHub, for example. So how do you use Git? Well, a couple of basic concepts here. Git is a command line tool. So you can imagine typing something into a command prompt. That's exactly where you're going to be using Git. Now there are some programs that allow you to use a user interface to manage your repository, but for the most part, you'll probably be using the command line. So here are some of the basic commands that you'll be using. First of all, if you're just starting a project, you'll be in an empty folder somewhere on your computer, and you'll open your console and type in git init, I-N-I-T. And what git init does is it creates in the directory you're in a .git folder. And that's where all the history of changes and information about the rest of your files will live. 2, if you are going to be making a contribution to an existing project, you'll use git clone. Git clone takes code from somewhere remotely, somewhere on the internet, and puts it locally on your machine. We'll be using this whenever you fork the repository you'll be contributing to, and then you'll clone that repo down to your machine. We'll talk about forking later. And so for these next two commands, it's helpful to think about the repository as things that you committed to changing. That you said, yes, this is how I want things to be. I'm committed to these changes I'm making. Because there are two stages. You can hit Control S or file save, and that you'll save your files to your disk. But if you actually want the history to be changed, there are a couple steps to take. First step in this set of commands is also the third command we'll be learning, which is git add. Git add takes whatever you've saved on your hard drive and puts it in a staging area for you to review the changes you're going to git commit to, which is our fourth command. And commit says all of the things in my staging area I want to save to the history. Now when you make a commit, it's always important to make a comment. A comment is something that you can tell your future self and other developers working with you what changes you made and why it was there in the first place. Now here's the fifth command, git push. Let's say you've already committed your changes, you're ready to take your changes here on your machine and put it to the place that you cloned your repository from. So where git clone takes your code from a remote location, not on your machine, and then moves it to your local machine, git push takes the changes you've made from your local machine here and puts it to a remote location. Branching comes in so that you can say, I am going to be adding this button to the accounts page. So branching takes it from the main history, you make a copy of that, and you make your changes. And then when it's time, and this is when a pull request comes in, when it's time to actually make your changes that you've committed to that timeline be part of the main history, make a pull request saying, hey, these changes I've made over here, and they become part of the main history. Once they're accepted, those changes become part of the main history, and then that branch is no longer needed. Now, we mentioned forking earlier. Forking is not really a Git command, but it is a concept that you'll use a lot whenever you're working in GitHub. Similar to branching, forking doesn't just make a small change in a history. It actually copies the entire history of every branch and moves it to another location, and actually makes you the owner. So let's say that you might be working in a .NET repository, but you want to fork it because you're going to contribute to it. Well, in that case, you fork that .NET repository, and then GitHub will copy that over to your account, and it will have all of the commits that were over here, all of the changes that were over here, all of the contributors. They're now a part of this, and you can build on top of that. And then when it's time to actually move your code into a PR here, then you'll open a PR across the fork, not just the branch. Just as a side note, branching is usually used by the same team, and forking is used by public contributors. That'll be your main method of contribution. Now, we can go all day, and probably tomorrow too, to talk about in-depth Git. But those are just some of the basic commands to get you started. We're going to be demonstrating here soon, but if you want more information, go to git-scm.com/doc. It's the documentation for all of the Git commands, all of the options for the commands, and examples to let you know how to actually use the tool. So now that we've covered all of that, let's see a demonstration. Go to part 2 of this video to see the demonstration, where we'll put everything we learned about today into action. See you then.